Look, the title was Supremacy. I looked, I couldn't find anything. I don't know. So we'll do the best we can. Okay, so let's. I guess before we start talking about any halachic implications of the split between Sephardim and Ashkenazim and the different halachas and Minhagim that arise from it, let's just take the scenic route a little bit and figure out how we got here before we talk about what some of the actual differences are. So I think I'll start with a few different stories that I noticed over the years of outsiders commenting on the split. For example, I saw that in the year 1927, the mandate government of Eretz Yisrael at that time, which was run by the British, decided to found the institution of the chief rabbinate. The first chief rabbis existed before the state existed. So in 1927, Sir Herbert Samuel, who was in charge, he was like the governor of Palestine at that time, decided to found the chief rabbinate. And in his research while he was trying to found it, he realized that it was going to be very difficult to find one person who everyone could agree on to be the chief rabbi. The primary problem that he ran into was that Sephardim wouldn't respect an Ashkenazi chief rabbi, and Ashkenazim wouldn't respect a Sephardic chief rabbi. And he writes in a letter in English, he writes in English, he says as follows, he says, it's extremely frustrating for me to see how these Jews, with what me appears to be mamash the most minor of differences, can't seem to get on the same page with each other, and no one's good enough for both of them. That's what he writes. So he's he's Jewish rather, but he's as Jewish as a guy. And observing from the outside, he's saying that he can't understand why to him they appear to be mamash the same. He can't figure out why they can't get on the same page and elect one chief rabbi. At the Hachtara of the first chief rabbis, which was the Sephardic chief rabbi was Rabbi Elyasher, and the Ashkenazi chief rabbi was Rav Kook. Rav Kook got up and he spoke, and he said he was meina all the times throughout the Jewish tradition where leadership was split. He spoke about the Shvatim, he spoke about the Zugis, he spoke about many different times in Chazal and Gemara where leadership was split between two people, Ravin and Rashi, Rav and Shmuel, Rav and Abaya. He went through an entire a sidra of how throughout Yiddishkeit there's always been a split between several leaders together. And fakat, this is Gufar Meseira, to have that every group should have its own leader, and it's not a negative thing at all. Another such thing I found was in the early 1500s, England. We spoke about the riots in York, a few months ago already. So after the riots in York, shortly following that, England passed an edict where they kicked all the Jews out of the country of England. No Jews were allowed in England. Now, for a few hundred years, there was no Jews in England until in the early 1500s, Menashe ben Yisrael, who was a Spanish Marrano Jew. He was raised as a Catholic, and then eventually he comes back to being fully Jewish. He's mechaber several svarim. So Menashe ben Yisrael begins to petition Oliver Cromwell, the King of England at that time in the early 1500s, to allow Jews back into England. And we have the correspondence recorded because Menashe ben Yisrael put it in his svarim, the correspondence that he had with the English government, and in it, Oliver Cromwell or his people send Menashe ben Yisrael a letter with 15 bulletin points of critiques about the Jews, things that are negatives about the Jews, and why Mamela, the English populace, doesn't want to have Jews there. And the interesting thing to me was that he goes through them, line item by line item, and some of them he answers, and some of them he says it's a mistake, that's not a Jewish custom, it's a tayus, you don't think. And by a few of them he says that's just Ashkenazim. Sephardim don't have those customs. He was a Sephardi, and by a few of them that's his answer to the King of England is, that's Ashkenazi customs, of course. They're peasants. I'm saying Sephardim don't do that, and we deserve to be allowed into the country. The first communities that were allowed back into England in the early 1500s were Sephardic communities, and only 100 years later did some Ashkenazim join these Kehilas in England and eventually take it over. Eventually it became a primarily Ashkenazi community, but it started with Sephardim like that. I saw a story, Rabbi Vadi Yosef, when in 1957, the Spanish, the country of Spain, was feeling, after the reparations from the Holocaust, after people were making amends, so to speak, for the horrible atrocities that were committed against the Jewish populace. So the King of Spain felt that it was time for the Spanish monarchy to make amends with the Jews that they kicked out, hundreds of years before that. And what they were proposing was that there should be an automatic right of return. Any Jew who could prove that he's of Spanish origin that he has even a grandfather or a great-grandfather who's of Spanish origin will automatically be entitled to Spanish citizenship. Now, that was a very beneficial thing for Israeli Jews because Israel's tax code is debilitating, and the Spanish tax code was a little friendlier. And there was plenty of Israeli Jews, Israeli Sephardim, Jews of Sephardic origin, who wanted to prove they have some sort of Sephardic heritage. They'd be entitled to Spanish citizenship, and then they have a tax break. So Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, who was a youngish man at that time, had a meeting with Juan Carlos, the Prince of Spain, to discuss the idea of following through. It ends up that Spain does grant automatic citizenship to Jews, and a whole tumult arises in the Paiskim if there's a chayrim to go back to Spain, which is maybe a topic we should revisit at a different time, maybe worth discussing, if there is a chayrim to return to Spain or not. But Rabbi Ovadia in his meeting with the Spanish king, so he says, they're discussing it, and the king asks him, from what he could understand from his research, when we call Sephardim, they're not all Sephardim. They're the Edot Mizrach. They come from the whole Maghreb. They come from Egypt. They come from Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, and etc. They come from so many different places. Why are they called Sephardim? And what Rav Adi explained to him, I think, is very relevant to us. Rav Adi explained to him as follows. He says, you should know that when you talk about sects in Judaism, like Sephardim and Ashkenazim, we're very different than other sects and other religions. He says, when you have a sect, two different sects of Christians, let's say you have the Catholics and the Protestants, their machlokes is be'ikr in the ikr hadas. They're only arguing about the ikr hadas. Their machlokes is how exactly to look at their God, what exactly the way to perceive Him, to look at Him. Their machlokes are all about ikr hadas, and almost nothing is about practical life. In regards to living, what's the difference of Protestant to Catholic? They're all the same. The rituals are the same, basically. The machlokes is only purely in ikr hadas, in how to exactly define who their God is. He said, by us, it's exactly the opposite. When it comes to ikr hadas, when it comes to defining who is a Jew, what is a Jew, what our relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, that Hashem revealed Himself at Har Sinai and gave us a Torah, on that we agree 100%. There's zero daylight between the sects in Judaism, between Sephardim and Ashkenazim in that. He says, Fakir, our machlokes are all in practical minhagim, in cultural anhaga, in how things developed over the years in different minhagim of different areas. And Memela, we're much more united than we are divided. And so he said, so the king asked him, so, well, why are they called Sephardim? They should be called something else. They're not all from Spain. So he told him, and this, take it or leave it, maybe this is the reason, maybe it's not the reason. He said the reason why they're called Sephardim is because the Iker halachas that they follow is the halachas of the Rambam, who was born in Cordoba in Spain, and therefore it's like derech eretz to the Rambam, whose halachas they follow. They all call themselves Sephardim. And the king was very impressed by this conversation, and what follows is that Spain does grant a law of return to all Jews of Spanish origin, and that happens. Now, with that hakdama in mind, that we're much more similar than we are different, let's try to figure out where the difference b'chlal stems from in the first place. Where does it start, these different minhagim, these different halachas that we have between Sephardim and Ashkenazim? So I'm going to say over some things. Some of them might be well known. For that I apologize. Some of them are less well known. But the Rambam in the Hakdama to the Yad, in the beginning of Sefer Mada, the Rambam has a famous Hakdama. It's an exceptional Hakdama describing Mesiras HaTorah. And the Rambam starts as follows. He says, all the mitzvahs that were given to Moshe Rabbeinu b'Sinai, Pirushim, everything was given to Moshe. Moshe understood everything, all the mitzvahs with all the Pirushim. Every mitzvah that the Rambam is going to describe in the entire 14 books of Yad HaChazaka are all things that were given to Moshe Rabbeinu. They were passed down from Rebbe to Talmud. And then the Rambam continues and he goes through a little bit the Hishtalshlus. He starts with the Mishnah Avos. Moshe gave it to Yeshua. Yeshua is a Canaan. He goes through the Hishtalshlus of Mesiras HaTorah. But he breaks it down in much greater detail. And the Rambam brings every Rebbe and every Talmud, and then he brings the Mesadri HaMishnah, who wrote the Mishnayos, Rebbe and his Talmidim, then the Mesadri HaGemara, the Yerushalmi was Rabbi Yochanan and his Talmidim, the Bavli was Rabbi Yehuda and Rashi and his Talmidim, and to me this is the main line over here. He says Nimtza, and this is the Rambam is what gives us such an ability to believe the Mesiras HaTorah as we have it today. He says Nimtza, says the Rambam as follows: Nimtza Mirav Ashi ad Moshe Rabbeinu Arba'im Ish. From Rav Ashi all the way up, meaning the Chsimas HaTalmud, from the end of the Gemara Bavli that we have still today, which we know is untouched because we have, for the most part untouched, meaning because we have, Kisviyadis and all the things. So till the Bavli that we have, that we're learning still today, from the Bavli till Moshe Rabbeinu is 40 men, says the Rambam. Rav Ashi to Rabbah, to Rav Huna, to Rav Yochanan, Rav and Shmuel, to to Rabbeinu HaKadosh, to Reb Shimon his father, Reb Gamliel his father, Reb Shimon his father, Gamliel Hazakin, and it goes on, Shmai Vav Talyin, Yehuda V'Shimon, Yeshua V'Nitai, Yosef Tignis Ish Seicha, Sefania, Chabakuk, Menachem, he continues, Achia, etc., etc., all the way up to Moshe Rabbeinu, and then the 40th Moshe HaTorah, the number of men that the Rambam puts, the 40th Moshe HaTorah is Me'im Hashem Elokei Yisrael. So, it's a beautiful chain that the Rambam's crafting to show the pride and the ability to trust our Messiah that we have. Where the Rambam could show you that it's literally 40 people, Ish Mi Pi Ish, Rab Mi Pi Talmud, who accepted it, and the 40th Moshe HaTorah, the beginning Moshe HaTorah, is at Kadosh Baruch Hu Alein by Har Sinai. So he says, Kol Elu Chacham HaNiskarim Hem Gedolei Aderis. All these 40 Chacham that are masker, these are the Gedolei Aderis. Mehem Rashi Yeshivas, some of them Rashi Yeshivas. Mehem Rashi Galiyas, some of them Reish Galusas. Mehem Sanhedrin Agdola, some of them sat on an actual Sanhedrin, some of them didn't. The Imam B'chol Davadar, and together with each one of them, at every generation, Alafim U'Revavis Sheshamu Mehem V'Imam. Thousands and tens of thousands of people who learned and heard from them and were part of the transmission of the Messiah Sater in every dar. It says, Ravina and Rav Ashi are the Seif Chachmei Talmud. Rav Ashi is the one who's Masad the Talmud, fine. Then he continues on and he says, so this is the Messiah, this is how we got the Gemara. And Memele says anything that's musker and a bavli is a chayv on every yid to follow. Anything that's mentioned in the Gemara Bavli, which has the shtempel of Ravina and Rashi, which means it has the shtempel of HaKadosh Baruch Hu Alein, because it's passed down directly from Moshe Rabbeinu from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is mechuyev on every Jew to accept. So, and this is the famous Rambam where the Rambam writes that anything that's halacha l'mishmisina, anything that comes from halacha l'mishmisina, is not possible to have machlekes in it. You can't have machlekes in something that comes from halacha l'mishmisina because it comes directly from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How can you have machlekes in something that Hashem Himself said from Moshe Rabbeinu? Now, the problem is, I'm just digressing here for a second. The problem is that there are, by the count of the Chavas Yair, there are 62 times in Shas where there's a machlekes in a halacha l'mishmisina. And because of that, the Chavas Yair has a long tshuva to explain how those are not really in the halacha. Shir Sinai, I mean, he goes through each sugya and shows how there's like a later addition to the halacha, and in that halacha there's a machlekes. But chalila, that in a halacha that's an actual halacha Shir Sinai, there can't be a machlekes because it comes from Moshe, from HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. So then says the Rambam, so where does the room for machlekes arise? So says the Rambam as follows: V'acha bezdina shor Rashi, nisfazru Yisrael b'chol ha'umas. Klal Yisrael was dispersed amongst all the nations. Pizer Yeser, much more dispersals than they had suffered before that. They reached the far-flung corners of the earth and to different islands in all different areas. And there was much fight and angst in the world at that time. And the ability to travel easily from one corner to the other corner, meaning from Jews from here to reach Jews from there, became much, much more difficult. And the entire limud of Talmud Torah took a big downturn. Klal Yisrael didn't have the ability anymore to gather together in groups of thousands or tens of thousands to transmit the Torah one generation to the other and to learn it with each other. There was literally a few, a Talmud Chacham with a small yeshiva here, a Talmud Chacham with a small yeshiva there. There was no ability to have large-scale transmission anymore of the Torah. Says, and he says, V'chol bezdin she'amar amad achar Talmud b'chol Medina, any bezdin that arose, a provincial bezdin, wherever it was, that arose in some far-flung corner of the earth that had its community, the gazar, and it made a gzeira, a hiskin, a hinig, l'bnei medinasai, it made a rule or a takano, or they instructed what the halacha should be to their Medina, to their area, their actions, the litigious actions of the bezdin, wasn't dispersed amongst Gans Klal Yisrael. Because of how distant they lived from each other, and the inability to travel. And he says, each one of these Batei Dinim are essentially Yechidim in every far-flung province. They don't even have the ability to force someone from another area to follow their Dinim and their halachas. You're just the Bezdin of this town. You're just the Bezdin of this town. You don't have the ability to impose your rules and your Havana of Torah on everybody. You don't tell one Bezdin to make the Gzeira, follow suit, follow the Bezdin, the other Bezdin's Gzeira. Because every Bezdin became independent, and basically, the more important than their independence, every Bezdin became minor. There was no Bezdin anymore that had the shtempel of Gans Klal Yisrael, that had the shtempel of being Meiser HaTorah. Everyone holds of this. This is what everyone accepted. it became far-flung. Every bezdin became minor, and a minor bezdin doesn't have the right to impose its psakim and its dinim and its havanas and gzeris on Gans Klal Yisrael. So Mamela says the Rambam, when this happened, he says, so Shilas arose, and there's many questions, and many rooms for machlekes, and many discrepancies between the halacha that's here, and the halacha that's there, and the halacha that this goyin says, and this goyin says, and there's no way to any more craft a coherent, mosaic of one picture where everyone could agree that this is the Torah HaMasur Lanu Moshe Rabbeinu. So says the Rambam, because of this problem, I felt the need to put together a sefer that would encompass in it. Lefichach, he says, I felt the need to put together a sefer that would encompass in it all the halachas, how I see them, how I see the halacha should be, the best and the brightest of what the Gaonim contributed to the Chachmei Talmud, the best and the brightest of how the halacha arrives to us today, and I put them all in one sefer, so the Laman Yoretz HaKoyer, a person could read it and he could know all the halachas that he needs to do. And says the Rambam, because of this, I chose to not include, and we know this, any Mara Mekaymis in the Rambam. The Rambam is unique in that way. The Rambam is from the first Svarim that, meaning, I'll explain what I mean. The Rif doesn't have Mara Mekaymis, but the Rif is written, Al Pisei Dera Talmud. So you look, it's Baba Kama, Parak Gimel. So you look, Baba Kama, Parak Gimel. You know exactly where the Rif is coming from. The Rambam made his own Seder. The Rambam was Mesader Svarim, Kafi the Yudal Chalakim that we have from the Rambam. Says the Rambam, I on purpose, I omitted any sources so that you shouldn't get drawn into the machleksim that exist and the whole backstory of every one of these dinim. I saved you that work. I sifted through the best and the brightest of all the Gaonim and Psakim, and with that I present to you the halacha Masur B'Yedenu, says the Rambam. So now, we know that, for lack of a better word, the Rambam was unsuccessful in this call. The Rambam wasn't able to provide organized, agreeable psak for Gans Klal Yisrael. If anything, the Rambam becomes the jumping off point, the basis of endless more machleksim and diunim. There probably has come out no svarim that have been written on as extensively as the Rambam. The Rambam becomes just the newest threshold for machlekes. So right here on the Hakdama is the first machlekes Rambam Ravid. The Ravid who attacks the Rambam throughout the entire sefer. Right here in the Hakdama is the first one. Says the Ravid, Amar Avram, the first one, Amar Avram, Zeh Mechaber Savar L'Takein. He thought he'd fix, V'loi Tikin, he didn't fix. He who Azav Derech Kol HaMechabrim, he left the route, the well-traveled route of all other Mechabrim who came before him. Asher Hoyu L'Fanav, Kihem Heviu Ra'il L'Devreim, they brought proofs and sources for their words. The Kasvar Advarim B'Shem Amram, they brought the name of the person who said it before them. And they helped with that, a great te'elas. Why? He says, Kipa'amim Rabbis many times, Ya'ala Lev HaDayin, it could arise on the heart of the Dayin, Oy HaOyser V'Hamatir, or someone who's permitting or prohibiting something, Ladin or Lahatir, Me'rayasa Mimakam Echad. He has a raya from one place. I have a raya from Magmar B'Makava, that the din in Shaila X should be Azay. And said Chacham, me in this case, who's paskening on this din from a Gemara Bavakama, Layada ki yesh gadol mimenu. I'm unaware that Rabbi Yashiv already spoke on the Inyan and brought a raya from a Gemara in Yavamis, something different. I'm pasha not aware of the whole shleimus of the sugya. That's a cheres makamachrik. You call him mefarshim einim shavim. There's no organized opinion amongst all the mefarshim. And if I would know that someone much bigger than me already spoke on the matter and said something else, so I'd certainly be mevatel das. I'd say, I didn't realize I made a mistake. Allah is like Rabbi Yashiv says, I made a mistake. So Va'ata says now someone who's learning the Rambam Sefer, he says, me, the learner, I don't know, why should I change my mind because you say so? Says the Ravid, I have a psak on a topic in Para, I say the din is Ezai. Come, I read the Rambam says in Para the din is a different din. Why do I have to listen to you? My sugya came in like this. Mainly you tell me there's a sugya elsewhere that comes out differently. It's okay, I'll analyze the source material and I'll change my mind if someone bigger than me says something. But just because this is how you bring down, I'm not going to be chayzer because of that. He says, let me decide. Why should I, says the Rav, my opinion? Because of his opinion. We're both just opinions trying to collect the sources amongst the sources. And I'm not willing to be about that. He says, and this is the crux, this is the line that's important to us. He says, says the Rambam presents it as if through the Tkufas HaGaonim, there was some sort of like shtalshus where the Gaonim came to certain conclusions. He says there are plenty of things with the Gaonim themselves. this Mechaber, meaning the Rambam, chose one strain of them, because from Bechibura, he paskin like some of the Gainim. Why should I be subject to listen to his choosing? And I don't agree with his outcomes. And he says, and we know how this relationship continues throughout the rest of the Sefer. We've been zeichet to have many of the Machlekes and Rambam Ravid. They make for some of the most intense sugis in the Rambam Ravid. So now, what the Rambam writes to us is very valuable. The Rambam describes the fracturing of halacha and Klal Yisrael. The Rambam describes how over time, as Klal Yisrael becomes more diffuse and spreads out, the fracturing begins to happen. Now, the Rambam tried to be misakin it and choose the best and the brightest of all the Gainim and figure out what the Pesakim should be, but jumps in the Ravid right away, and we know that this is taka how it's gone since then. He said, no, Mechatesa, you don't get to choose one side over the other, and I disagree, there's machleksim amongst the Gainim themselves, and Mechatesa, this is the right way. So now, these machleksim amongst the Gainim that the Ravid is referring to, so what are they? What is this two different minhagim that the Ravid already seems to be described? The Ravid seems to be telling us that predating my machlekes of the Rambam, predating 1,000 years ago, there's already grace and machleksim amongst the minhagim and the Gainim. So there's a sefer, and this is not a well-known sefer. There's a sefer called Sefer Achilukim Shemin Bavel Eretz Yisrael. It's you won't find it on any shelf in any base medrash. It's a very unknown sefer. The Marshal felt it was so important that in the original edition of the Yam Shel Shleima, in the end of Baba Kama, he prints. Paper was expensive, ink was expensive. It was his sefer, his magnum opus. He was putting out his thing. He felt it so important that he copied the Sefer Achilukim Shemin Bavel Eretz Yisrael and puts it on the last few pages of Baba Kama in the Yam Shel Shleima. Today it's not there anymore, but in the first edition of the Yam Shel Shleima it was there. The Marshal knew of it. Now, it's a sefer. It's from the Tekufas HaGainim. We don't know exactly who wrote it. It's a sefer from the Gainim that describes 51 chilukim in Minhagim between the Kehilas that followed the Gain of Eretz Yisrael and Kehilas that followed the Gain of Bavel. Now, you'll notice something interesting in it. The Rishonim, amongst the Rishonim, the sefer is widely quoted, meaning it's quoted in many Rishonim many times. But you'll notice a very interesting thing. The only Rishonim that quoted are Ashkenazim. There's Kemat, with one exception, only the Ramban, who Pashtus knew of it from Vaiter Ashkenazim, only the Ramban, but only Ashkenazi Rishonim quote the sefer. No Sephardi Rishonim quote the sefer. So it's a sefer that was describing the chilukim of the minig between Eretz Yisrael and Bavel, meaning Bavel was the standard minig, and this was a sefer showing in 51 places where we divert from the minig of Bavel and we do like the minig Eretz Yisrael, like the Gainim of Eretz Yisrael. Some of it's based on the Yerushalmi, some of it's not based on the Yerushalmi, but we do like the Minhagim of Eretz Yisrael. And this is a sefer that only Chachmei Ashkenaz had, only Ashkenazi Rishonim have, and only they quote it. So again, you see another occurrence of an earlier split amongst the Ga'inim of different Minhagim. So now the split. So now we've isolated Al Kapanim location. So now it seems like the split starts from Ga'in Eretz Yisrael to Ga'in Bavel. That's the first time you find the split that the Ravid is describing amongst the Psakim and the Ga'inim have locations. So now I'll just quickly chart for you the two chains of transmission and how that brings us to where we have Sephardim and Ashkenazim today. So now I don't know if anyone's familiar. There's a sefer called Sefer HaKabbalah from the Ravid. Now it's not the Ravid, this Ravid. There's three Ravids that we have Svarim from. There's the first Ravid is Rav Avraham ibn Dawud. He's more of a historian than a Talmud Chacham, meaning he's a Talmud Chacham also, but his primary contribution is history. He writes the history of Klal Yisrael. The second Ravid is the Eshkol, which is Ravid is Rav Avraham Ab Bezdin. That's the Eshkol. And he is the father-in-law of the third Ravid. That's the Ravid on the Rambam, which is Rav Avraham ben David. So we have Rav Avraham ibn Dawud is Ravid, Rav Avraham Ab Bezdin is Ravid, and Rav Avraham ben David is Ravid. We have three Ravids. So the first Ravid has a famous tale. It's made it to all the Jewish history books since then. Amongst the greatest people bring it down, where he writes about how the transmission of Torah happened from Bavel to the Arab lands and to Sfar. And I'll just read it from you. I brought it. He writes as follows. It's a famous story. I'm sure people are familiar with it. He writes that there was a boat that was traveling from the island of Bari to unknown, to we don't know where, and it was set upon by pirates. He has names here from the pirate's name was Abu Rahman, who was a king was a messenger from the king of Spain, whose name was El Rahman El Natsar. He says the pirates set upon the boat, and on the boat was Arba Chachamim Gedolim, who were traveling in Medina's Bari, Medina Nikras, Safsitin. Now, we don't know where Safsitin is. We don't have any knowledge of this area that he's discussing. But this is something that's written, 950 years ago. It's a long time ago the Rabbi's writing this. And he writes, there was 4 Chachamim Gedolim who were traveling on this boat. The Chachamim Elu La'achnasas Kala Ha'yolachim. They were going to collect money for a Kala. The Kabash Aben Rachman Ha'aniyah. Aben Rachman captured this boat. And he captured these Chachamim. He says one of them was Rav Chushiel, the father of Rabbeinu Hananel. One of them is Rav Moshe, the father of Rabbeinu Chanoich. He was there together with his wife and his son Rabbeinu Chanoich. And the third one was Rav Shmarya ben Rav Elchanan. And the fourth one, we don't know his name. And now this is the tragic part, he says, and the pirates immediately tried to take the wife of Rav Moshe, the mother of Rabbeinu Chanoich, and take her with them. She cried out to her husband Rabbeinu Moshe, and she asked Lashon Kodesh, and she said, if I jump into the water, will I have Tchias HaMesim? If I jump into the water, will I have Tchias HaMesim? He says Hashem, he quoted our pasuk that the Gemara in Gittim brings for a similar story. Hashem mibash and ashiv mitzulas yam. Someone who was in the bowels of the sea, Hashem says, I'll return him. And she jumps over the side and she drowns and she dies. That's it. So now the story continues. He says, They didn't tell a soul that they were Greisa Talmidei Chachamim. They were just quiet. They were Jewish captives. He says, and eventually, as was the minhag of that day, the pirates would try to ransom the Jewish captives amongst Jewish communities as they travel. So he says, they sold Shmarya in Alexandria of Mitzrayim, in Alexandria of Egypt, that's where he was sold. And from there, he went to Mitzrayim, to Fustat, which is the old city, where the Jews lived there. He became the Rosh Hashiva there. He was a Greisa Talmid Chacham. It says they sent Rav Chushiel, they sold Rav Chushiel into Africa, B'chayf Hayam, which is, I think, Tunis is where he ended up, to Misham al Medina's Kairouan, which is in Tunis, where Rabbeinu Hananel, eventually his son Rabbeinu Hananel, ends up opening a primary yeshiva for Klal Yisrael, where some of the greatest Gaonim of the Rimagash and the Rif and Rabbeinu Nisim learn there, and that becomes like a primary yeshiva for Sfarad. And the third one, he says, ended up in Cordoba in Spain. That's fine, and he continues. Now, he rather says a funny story, just not worth saying over. He says in Cordoba, where they landed, so he says the Dayan who was there was Rav Nassan Chassid. He was the Dayan in Shul. And when Rav Moshe and Rav Chanoich slunk into the back as captives and sat down in the back row, the Dayan of Nassan Chassid was in the middle of saying a shir. And he said as follows, he had a kasha. He says, the Mishnah in Yuma says that on Yom Kippur there was not more than Chamesh Tibulim and Asara Tfilas. 5 dippings and 10 other kinds of dippings. But he found the stira that the Mishnah, and the dippings, the Tibulim that it's referring to in that Mishnah is the Kohen Gadol being toivel himself in the mikveh. That's what it's referring to. That he went 10 times to the mikveh. He found the stira, and this is what he was talking about in the Mishnah. He said, I have a kasha. Mishnah in Yuma also says, I'll call hazah v'hazah tzarech tvila. Every hazah that you make on Mizbeach, you need to be toivel. He says, do the math. We count achas v'achas, achas v'shtayim, call hazah v'hazah. It's way more than 10 tfilas. And he was tummeling back and forth, and he couldn't have an answer until Rabbeinu Moshe in the back raised his hand and he said, Lanias Daiti, the Tarot says that the tfilas in this Mishnah is referring to tfilas b'mikvah, and the tfilas, this is all in here. And the tfilas that you're referring to are tfilas in the dam, and they're 2 different tfilas. And to his credit, Rabbi Nassim Dayan said, I'm way out of my league. We have a real Talmud Chacham over here, and from now on, I'm a Talmud, and he's the Rebbe, and he put him up to Darshan, and he took over the Kila in Cordoba. So what the Ravid is telling us over here is how the transmission of 4 kilo b'siyat d'shmaya. Now, we don't know if this is exactly how it happened or not exactly how it happened, but what the Ravid is telling us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Masaviv, that 4 Greis Gaonim from the school of the Gaonim in Bavel, from the Talmidei Chacham in Bavel, the Messiah of Bavel, were dispersed in an unnatural way along the North African coast and Spain. They were dispersed in an unnatural way to be able to give over and to bring with them the Messiah of the Torah that was sorely lacking in the area. The people over there were Amaratzim. They did, as we see, the Dayan, what an Amaratz the Dayan was. So, that gives you an idea of what the Hamaynam must have been holding by. And Kilu Mamash B'Yad Hashem, B'Tziyat Nishmaya, they were dispersed along the coast over there to bring with them the Messiah Satira of Bavel and to bring Yenim Messiah to these areas. So that's the Sephardic world, North Africa and Spain, has the Mesiris HaTorah from Bavel brought by these four Gaonim at the end of the Tkufas HaGaonim. Now, there's a tshuva from the Marshal in Tshuva Chavtes. The Marshal writes over there, someone asked him to tell us how the Torah got to where it got to by you, by the Marshal. The Marshal says, I'll tell you the truth, I'm not a historian, I don't know who lived when and what, but based on my Pashut reading of Svarim, based on my reading of different Rishonim in Svarim, I've crafted a picture, and he paints the picture that he gives. Now, obviously, the Ramachal's reading of Svarim was thorough enough that he has a proper transmission of the Gainim. So now the Marshal writes, the Marshal writes that he starts with the end of the Tkufas HaGainim. He says, Rav Haigain kibul Torah Rav Shuri Gain Aviv, v'samchu leganusa ben esrim shana. Rav Haigain got smicha to be a Gain when he was 20 years old. And then he says, Misham ve'elech paska Gainim. That's the end of the Tkufas HaGainim, there's no more Gainim. Rabbeinu Gershom Mar HaGailu was on the side of our Gemara. Rabbeinu Gershom Mar HaGailu was from the first of the Rishonim in Ashkenaz, Rabbeinu Gershom Mar HaGailu, Kibul Meir Rav Hai, he accepted Torah from Rav Hai, then Rashi, and then he continues, Mosar Leveliyo Azak, and he continues, and it goes on, until he brings it all the way to his dar. All the Gaonei Ashkenaz from there to his dar. So what the Marshal is describing for us is how a different Masera, a different strain of Gaonic Masera that came from Rav Shrira to Rav Hai to Rabbeinu Gershom, to Rabbeinu Gershom's Talmidim, to Rashi, to his Talmidim, to Balei HaTosfos, etc., came from there. Now, we don't know that stream is more Eretz Yisraelic than the other stream, because Rav Haigain is very much part of the stream of the Gaonei Bavel also. But Al Kapanim, there are many who feel that the earlier Sefer Chilukim Shem Bavel Eretz Yisrael is an incomplete description of the many halachic differences and minhagim differences that existed among these communities, and how it was transmitted from the Gaonim to Germany and from the Gaonim to Africa and Spain. And Mela, they both had an authentic Messiah from the Gaonim's Torah, and once they got to their remote locations, so now they were very separated from each other. And now, let's call it 1,000 years ago, is where the real chilukim and minhagim and halachas begins to develop, in earnest. Where these minor differences, meaning a lot of these chilukim from Bavel Yisrael, you could look it up, you could find the sefer on Eitzar Chachma. A lot of these chilukim don't exist, or have since been, everybody agrees like one side, meaning they're not a good enough explanation of all the chilukim and minhagim between Bavel Yisrael. They're just the idea that there was an earlier chiluk between Bavel Yisrael that made it to two different locations, and based on those two communities, much more chilukim, develop over time. Now, so the shmuz becomes about the chaymer of minhagim and how every kehila has to keep the minhagim and how we pass them like minhagim. And I think we'll hold it here. But the next place to go with this is the chayre to the Ramah, the Mechaber, the Beis Yosef, which they don't invent any of the minhagim chilik, but they codify it. Meaning they put it all in one place so that we could know now what happens. We got up to, let's say, the year 1000 now. The Ramah and the Beis Yosef are in the 1500s. So they will put a capstone on the 500 years of minhagim and chalukim that develop, from after we were talking. So I think the next place we'll go is talk about the chaymer of minhagim and how these different minhagim and meseris are codified in the Shulchan Aruch between the Ramah and the Mechaber. To be continued. Hi, guys.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.